Hello and welcome back to another Mahner Farms video. Today we're still in the cold and wet time of spring, so I don't have anything great to record, but I have been wanting to make this video for a while, so I decided today was finally the day. Today's topic is one that is discussed pretty frequently online, and one that every time I see it on TikTok or on YouTube, I'm so tempted to leave a detailed comment addressing it. But I never feel that I can fully discuss the topic in that format, and even if I did, the average commenter is not likely to read it, just to spit back some soundbite and move on. So I'll be talking about it at length in this video, and that topic is how to pass on the family farm. Now this is naturally something that people get very emotional about, and for good reason. There are those who have been devastated by the destruction of the family farm, which occurs when this is mishandled. There are those who have been abused by their parents and siblings when the time came to finally sign everything over. There are also those who lost everything because the last generation waited until they died to sign it over, and then the will was contested and the farm died anyway, as the courts ignored the will in favor of even distribution. And of course there are those who, even though they have never put any work, time, or money into the farm, somehow still think that they're entitled to some form of inheritance and plan their whole life for it. And so when anyone argues that they shouldn't get any, they get real butthurt about it. Watch for those folks in the comments section, as they typically are very easy to spot. But that's why we're here today. It's emotional because it's impactful, and that's why I'm taking the time to make this video. If you care about legacy and keeping the family farm intact, then the answer is actually super simple. It may be hard to implement, as it will certainly make some people angry, but the answer has always been there. There are plenty of legacy family farms out there that have existed for 6 to even 10 generations in this country. It may not be the norm, but that's because of the issues that we're going to be discussing today. The age-old wisdom says the first generation builds the farm, the second generation grows the farm, and the third generation loses the farm. But this certainly doesn't have to be the case. In an ideal situation, nobody gets greedy and wants to auction the farm off for an easy retirement. They want to pass on the farm to their best heir, who will keep the farm and the family legacy going. And the heirs all know this, and from an early age accept that only one person is going to get the farm, and that's that. So unlike many who like to blame the third generation in the age-old adage, it's actually almost always the second generation's fault for the loss of the farm, and that's what we're here to discuss. So, the first issue to discuss is succession planning. Some people might call this end-of-life planning, but that is already where we start to have a major problem. This should not take place at the end of your life. Waiting until death or severe old age to stop controlling the farm and to pass it on to the next generation is how the boomer generation almost single-handedly destroyed small family farming in America. Farmers need to learn how to retire. They need to implement it at a young enough age that the next generation is young enough to build towards their own retirement at a young enough age, and so on and so forth. If you don't assume the family farm legally and financially until you're 40 years old, unless it was a fully paid off and modernized, turnkey-ready farm, there is little to no chance that you'll be able to retire in 20 years, in time to pass it on to the next 40-year-old generation. So it only takes a generation or two to spread it out so much that the young up-and-coming farmer is in their 50s or even 60s before they actually own the farm. This is unacceptable. So lesson number 1 is that the older generations need to let go. They need to pass the reins when their successors are still young enough to take them. Issue number 2 is how to pass on the farm. Let's start with cost, as that is the simplest and most important factor. Now this issue has to be seen through the duality of a simple question, through which we are framing this whole argument, and that is, do you actually care if the family farm breaks up and disappears? Do you want it to continue as an unbroken family farming legacy, or does that not actually matter to you at all, and you just want to cash out? Because if legacy or the farm doesn't mean anything to you, then the answer is simple. Sell it to your kid at market value, break it up, split it between your kids, or just auction it off. Any of those things destroy any chance of the farm succeeding or surviving, and you get your big paycheck. But I'm going to assume that those continuing to watch the video from this point on care if the farm survives, and so we're going to frame every argument in that specific light. So how do you pass the farm on? The current market value of land in the US is absolutely insane, so selling to your child at market value is absolutely not an option. That's because it simply doesn't cash flow. If the next generation needs to get a mortgage for $2 million to buy the family farm, they'll never pay that off. and the debt will kill the farm when it's their time to die. This is an especially terrible option considering the generation that is selling at these prices is trying to turn a 10,000% profit on the land many of them got for free, or for land prices so astronomically low that the capital gains should wipe them out entirely. We cannot pretend this method is anything short of the greed and arrogance that certain generations of Americans have become known for. And for good reason. And this ignores the fact that, unfortunately, most US family farms are not turnkey ready when it's time to pass the reins. The tendency of small US farms has always been to grow and improve within the first decade or two of ownership, to the point where they are financially viable, then to coast until retirement. This usually means that infrastructure improvements, equipment upgrades, operation size, and optimization are almost always passed on to the next generation. This means that even if a farm is given entirely to the next generation, free of charge, that person still needs to finance or pay out of pocket potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars just to modernize to the point of profitability. New buildings, or simply building repairs, storage facilities, new equipment, or even just equipment maintenance on the typically very worn out and outdated equipment on the farm, not to mention starting a herd of cattle, for cattle-based operations, these costs can easily double the amount of startup costs for a farming operation. So before going any further, I should probably define what a turnkey-ready farm is, because I'll be using that term throughout the rest of this video, and I don't want to have to describe it every single time. So pay attention. A turnkey-ready farm is, simply put, a farm that, if you bought it on day one, you could run it fully without needing to upgrade anything, fix anything, or buy anything, and on day two, you'd be running full speed. That's what we're going to be using to define this. So let's keep things simple and just use a dairy farm for a specific example. But of course, a turnkey-ready farm should be considered in any context for any farm. So a turnkey-ready dairy farm has all the equipment needed to run the farm. Tractors that are appropriately sized for every function on the farm and in good working order, preferably modern enough so that parts and service are still possible. And of course, it also needs the equipment for each job on the farm. It also needs a herd, and that means if you have a 50-cow operation, you need 50 milking age cows and enough replacement stock that you can effectively manage your herd. You need modern milking equipment that meets all current safety and cleanliness requirements, as well as being modern enough to be serviceable. You also need upkept buildings. A barn cannot be collapsing, falling apart, or too small for the operation. It needs to have a good roof on it. It needs solid walls, intact windows, a working sanitation system, and an up-to-date milk house, and up-to-code electrical and plumbing. You also need feed storage adequate to feeding your herd. Ideally, this is vertical storage, but if not, it should be up to code and efficiency standards, not egg bags in the mud. It also needs enough land to feed the animals that you're milking, at least in simple grain and roughage, to keep feed purchasing costs low enough to operate. A turnkey-ready farm is one that a new owner can walk into and farm, period. So keep in mind that when I use the term going forward, this is what I am describing. Anything short of this is simply not turnkey ready. So how do you pass the farm on? Whether it's turnkey or not, the answer is simple. As cost effectively as you possibly can to give the next generation the best possible chance of surviving and hopefully improving the operation. This misguided belief that each generation should start from zero is asinine, and is the leading cause of so many family farms and businesses in general failing. You should plan for and build up your retirement while you are operating, not try to pass on your financial burden to the next generation. So the answer is complex. If you still have the farm financed, you can sometimes pass on the farm to the next generation and have them assume your debt. This is how our farm was passed from my grandfather to my father. My grandfather was a typical, the bank has plenty of money boomer farmer who avoided paying taxes and lost money constantly on the farm. So when it came time to pass the reins, my father was quote-unquote gifted the farm, and he assumed the massive debt that came with it. This is not uncommon. Of course, the other method is to sell it to your children and then pay off your debt. But you had better hope that if this is the case, your debt is substantially less than the farm is worth, or you'll finance your children right out of any hope that they'll ever be profitable. In instances where the farm is paid off, the answer is simpler and better for everyone involved. Best case scenario, you have the whole farm paid off, and you built up your retirement enough to have your house paid off so you can retire with very few expenses and just pass the farm on to your heir, lock, stock, and barrel. And they get a huge head start and are able to grow and improve the operation, and the farm gets better with each generation. This is especially ideal if the farm is turnkey ready. So we'll call that scenario A, because that is the absolute best case scenario scenario, and that is realistically what all family farms should be aiming for if they care about legacy and keeping the farm alive. On the other hand, let's say the farm is paid off, but it's not turnkey ready. That's actually the situation that our farm is currently in. The farm is paid off, but absolutely everything is broken, decrepit, worn out, and outdated in an extreme sense. There's no milking herd, the barn is in need of dramatic repairs, and nearly none of the equipment is in working order, and almost all of it is incredibly old, worn out, and severely outdated. Still, the best answer is passing the farm on as cheaply as possible, preferably free, as the next generation is going to need a few $100,000 just to get the operation running, much less modernized or improved. This is obviously not ideal, but with enough land and a possible start, it still sets up the next generation well enough and saves on the largest cost, which is still the price of land. Now, for a third scenario, how about a turnkey ready farm that is modernized, efficient, and ready to go, but is not paid off? Well, here you have options. Since the farm is turnkey ready, it is a valuable asset that can pay itself off in time, so selling in a way to the next generation is much more of an option here. The approach will depend heavily on the amount of money that is actually owed on the farm. The easiest method is the buy-in approach. This is where the owner essentially sells their herd to the next generation, and possibly the equipment as well, assuming it's all appropriately sized and up to date. This should be a very large chunk of money for the current owner, but not so much that it strains the next generation to the point where they can't afford to run the farm, since it is pretty much their only expense, assuming that the land and buildings were gifted. This is still a very feasible option. It allows the last generation to hopefully pay off any debt the farm has, and if necessary, subsidize their retirement. Although ideally the farmer was already prepared for that, and in which case they should scale the sale to give their heir the best possible deal. Now we'll move on to the worst case scenario that we'll be talking about today, and this is unfortunately a very common one that you see in the year of our Lord 2025. A farm that is not turnkey ready, is 20 or more years out of date, has old failing buildings and machinery, a weak or undersized herd of cattle, and worst of all, it's financed to the hilt. How does this farm survive? Well, that's tough. If you've let your farm get to this point, you've pretty much nailed the farm's coffin shut yourself. Short of the next generation making a fortune off farm and then buying it from you above market value so you can pay off all your debt before they sink an ungodly amount of money into the operation, you really don't have any options. In this case, if you want your farm to have any chance of survival, the next generation will have to assume your debt, and essentially you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back and hopefully your house, which you should have paid off and had separate from the farm anyway. In this case, the next generation will likely need off-farm income and to spend their entire lives fixing your mess, with little chance of ever doing more than desperately trying to climb out of the giant hole that you've dug for them. In this case, I'd argue the best possible solution is to auction everything off to the highest bidder, bite the bullet, and admit you lost the farm, pay off the debt, and give whatever profit remains to your heir and hope that they can start anew and not make the mistakes you did. At current land and animal prices, you might even be able to do it. Now, these are only a handful of the possible situations out there, but I hope they illustrate a core point, which is if legacy matters to you, you should not be looking to get rich when you pass on the farm to the next generation. Family farms only exist long-term when they are designed to implement the lifestyle as profitably as possible without using up the finite resources that you have or being the last generation on that land. It requires self-control, responsible stewardship, financial sense, and no small amount of good luck. But with that, hopefully taken care of, I'd like to move on to the next area of our discussion, which is, of course, the heirs themselves. And I'm going to use the term heirs in the plural sense only once, because there should never be multiple heirs. It doesn't matter if you have no kids, 1 kid, or 20 kids. The farm needs to go to one person, period. Anything else, and you might as well auction it off and split the profits between the heirs in question, and be done with it. Splitting land or ownership stake between multiple siblings always leads to failure. Even in the best case scenario, where say you have 2 brothers who get along great, are both fiscally responsible, hard workers who care about the operation, and are knowledgeable and agree with each other 100% of the time. And I feel like everyone out there should know that this is highly idealized, that only buys you one generation. And then what? Is that impossible situation going to happen again, but this time with cousins? What if one brother wants to split the land amongst his 3 children, and the other wants to sell out? By splitting the baby, in this case the farm, all you've done is kicked the can down the road, dumping the responsibility on someone else's doorstep. In most cases, realistically speaking, this means that once again, the farm dies, and it's auctioned off, dead with the next generation. So the most important first step is going to be picking the correct heir. The first qualification is simple, and the most important one. The heir needs to want it. They have to want to farm. They need to show that, whether through hard work on the farm, financial investment, time investment, education into running a business or farming, something. They need to show that they are capable of running a farm or even a business in general. So if you don't have a child that meets those basic requirements, it may be time to look for a niece or nephew or a younger cousin that does. I know this is often heresy to a family farm, but an heir doesn't need to be your child. They simply need to be the right heir. But assuming you've got someone in mind with good work ethic, interest in farming, and financial sense, and hopefully an education in the topics of business and/or agriculture. Now, they need to share your values. Does legacy matter to them? Do they know the history of the farm? How it came to be? The struggles it went through? This is actually super important, because if you care about legacy, that means more than just your heir, it means their heirs as well. Are they going to auction off the farm when they want to retire, or sell it when the going gets tough? If so, then they're not the right choice. So, what if you've got a dozen children and they all want a piece of the inheritance, and a couple of them even want to run the farm themselves? This 2-part question is where the rubber meets the road. For the first half, tough luck. You are not entitled to the land, any profits from the land, any of the assets, or any financial inheritance simply because your parents own a farm. I know that's a tough pill to swallow, but there it is. Equal isn't fair, and fair isn't equal. And if you care about legacy, you likely already know this. But anyone who isn't willing and able to run the farm and keep it in the family should be cut out of the farm entirely. And the younger you do this, the better it is for everyone. Too many families have been destroyed by a selfish parent who dangles the farm out as a carrot on a string in front of their children until retirement. You make your decision, and then you implement it. The farm, all its land, all its assets, and all its profits absolutely cannot be split up. If you do this, you will destroy your farm in one move. I personally have known several farms that have gone tits up this way, as too many parasites living and working off the farm, but expecting a rent check for land that was never theirs, or a profit share check from the farm they don't work on or pay for, have sucked the farm dry. And that brings up the topic of buying out. This one always makes me laugh. You'll see someone make a post saying the farm should go to one person, and usually the argument is being made by the person who has invested their time, money, and work on the family farm for years before it being passed on to them. And the comment section is always filled with the same responses. Well, then buy out the farm, or then you have to buy out the other siblings, or some variation of that. Here's the thing. The other siblings do not own the farm. They never did. And they aren't entitled to jack shit. They do not deserve to be bought out, because none of it is theirs. A family farm is not communal property. It's private property that belongs entirely to the current owner. Caring about legacy and family does not mean that everybody gets a slice. In fact, realistically, it means exactly the opposite. Here's a message directly to all the wannabe parasites out there, hoping to get a cut of the family farm someday, despite never putting anything into it. Get over it. It's not yours. It never was, you don't deserve it, and you're certainly not entitled to it. So that might sound harsh, but in reality it shouldn't. Responsible parents make sure their children aren't living under delusions for their entire adult life. If you wait until your children are all middle-aged before sitting them down and discussing how things are going to go, that's entirely on you, and any fallout or destroyed relationships are on your head. If you clearly make your intentions plain, and explain that this is the way things are going to be, there should never be any family fallout. The earlier you have the tough conversations, the easier it is for everyone involved. And for those who still want to leave something to their other children, this is where that early life planning that we discussed at the beginning comes even more into play. By divesting yourself of the farm at an early enough age, you have the opportunity to build assets separate to the farm. Usually what this looks like is life insurance, savings accounts, retirement plans, annuities, personal homes, personal possessions, etc. that you can freely gift or pass on without it hurting the farm in any way. Most often, the largest asset after the farm is the personal home that you have. In the best case scenario, you can enter into a life estate contract with a child or family member, which guarantees you a place to live for the remainder of your life, but also results in your next of kin inheriting a valuable asset, in this case a house, ideally with a preferable inheritance tax situation. Having decades of separation between the farm and personal property and assets makes actual end-of-life planning a lot easier, and this is where you can actually fairly distribute your assets to your next of kin without destroying the family farm. The key here is making sure that you don't view the farm as your personal property that only belongs to you and you can do with it what you will. If you care about legacy, you view the farm as separate from your own personal property. And just from a financial sense, you should always keep your finances separate as well. But that's actually where I'm going to end today's video. I could go on literally for hours about this topic because there is frankly just so much to say, but I feel I've covered the areas of discussion that I typically bring up when this topic is discussed in any format, and so I hope it has been enlightening and hopefully even useful to any of you. If you're looking to interact with this video, I invite you to comment your story down below. How did your family farm transition get handled? Did it succeed, or did the farm get lost? Did your family survive the transition, or did you lose any loved ones who felt that they had been mistreated? Be kind and civil, or you'll likely be censored out. But share your story there if you're inclined. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day, and I'll see you next time.